Auditorium nostrum in nomine Domini. We are looking at the encyclical of Pope Pius the 11th on Christian marriage. We are coming to the end of it, so we should finish this week. We left off on page 23, paragraph 85. Take it. Michael, or whoever's ready.
The advocates of the neo-paganism of today have learned nothing from the sad state of affairs, but instead, day by day, more and more vehemently, they continue by legislation to attack the insolubility of marriage.
Indissolubility
of the marriage bond, proclaiming that the lawfulness of divorce must be recognized, and that the antiquated laws should give place to a new and more humane legislation. Many and varied are the grounds put forward for divorce, some arising from wickedness and the guilt of the persons concerned, others arising from the circumstances of the case. The former they describe as subjective, the latter as objective. In a word, whatever might make married life hard or unpleasant. They strive to prove their contentions regarding these grounds for divorce legislation they would bring about by various arguments. Thus, in the first place, they maintain that it is for the good of either party that the one who is innocent should have the right to separate from the guilty, or that the guilty should be withdrawn from a union, which is unpleasant to him and against his will. In the second place, they argue the good of the child demands this, for either it will be deprived of a proper education or the natural fruits of it, and will too easily be affected by the discords and shortcomings of the parents, and draw from the path of virtue. And thirdly, the common good of society requires that these marriages should be completely dissolved, which are now incapable of producing their natural results, and that legal reparations should be allowed when crimes are to be feared as the result of the common habitation and intercourse of the parties. This last, they say, must be admitted to avoid the crimes being committed purposefully with a view to obtain the desired sentence of divorce for which the judge can legally loose the marriage bond, as also to prevent people from coming before the courts when it is obvious from the state of the case that they are living in perjury, that they are lying and perjuring themselves, all of which brings the court and the lawful authority into contempt. Hence, the civil laws, in their opinion, have to be reformed to meet these new requirements, to suit the changes of the times and the changes in men's opinions, civil instructions, and customs.
Civil institutions
and customs. Each of these reasons is considered by them as conclusive, so that all taken together offer a clear proof of the necessity of granting divorce in certain cases.
So in other words, the Pope is condemning all these excuses to justify divorce at the civil level. And there's no justification for it. There is justification for temporary separation, but never divorce. 86. Andres.
Others, taking a step further, simply state that marriage, being a private contract, is, like other private contracts, to be left to the consent and the good pleasure of both parties, so can be dissolved for any reason whatsoever.
Go on.
Opposed to all these reckless opinions, venerable brethren, stands the unalterable law of God, fully confirmed by Christ, a law that can never be deprived of its force by the decrees of men, the ideas of a people, or the will of any legislator. What God hath joined together, let no man put asunder. And if any man acting contrary to this law shall have put asunder, his action is null and void, and the consequence remains, as Christ himself has explicitly confirmed. Everyone that putteth away his wife and marrieth another committeth adultery, and he that marrieth her that is put away from her husband committeth adultery. Moreover, these words refer to every kind of marriage, even that which is natural and legitimate only. For, as has already been observed, that indissolubility by which the loosening of the bond is once and forever, and for all removed from the whim of the parties, and from every secular power, is a property of every true marriage.
Yes, so the church again defends the bond of marriage. And Christ established it, and no man, no authority can dissolve it. 88, read on, Guadalupe.
Let that solemn pronouncement of the Council of Trent be recalled to mind in which, under the stigma of anathema, it condemned these errors. Quote, if anyone should say that on account of heresy or the hardships of cohabitation or a deliberate abuse of one party by the other, the marriage tie may be loosened, let him be anathema. End quote. And again, quote, if anyone should say that the church errs in having taught or in teaching that, according to the teaching of the gospel and the apostles, the bond of marriage cannot be loosed because of the sin of adultery of either party, or that neither party, even though he be innocent, having given no cause for the sin of adultery, could contract another marriage during the lifetime of the other, and that he commits adultery who marries another after putting away his adulterous wife, and likewise that she commits adultery who puts away her husband and marries another, let him be anathema.
Yes. Basically, the Council of Trent condemns all these excuses. I want a divorce because. I want a divorce because of this and that, and he did that, and she did this. Doesn't work. Not in God's eyes. 89, Gavril.
If therefore the church is not erred and does not err in teaching this, and consequently it is certain that the bond of marriage cannot be loosed even on account of the sin of adultery, it is evident that all the other weaker excuses that can be and are usually brought forward are of no value whatsoever, and the objections brought against the firmness of the marriage bond are easily answered. For in certain circumstances, imperfect separation of the parties is allowed, the bond not being severed. This separation, which the Church herself permits and expressly mentions in her canon law in those canons which deal with the separation of the parties as to marital relationship and cohabitation, removes all the alleged inconveniences and dangers. It will be for the sacred law and to some extent also the civil law, insofar as civil matters are affected, to lay down the grounds, the conditions, the method and precautions to be taken in a case of this kind, in order to safeguard the education of children and the well-being of the family, to remove all these evils which threaten the married persons, the children, and the state. Now all those arguments that are brought forward to prove the indissolubility of the marriage tie, arguments which have already been touched upon, can equally be applied to all, to exclude and not only the necessity of divorce, but even the power to grant it. While for all the advantages that can be put forward for the former, there can be adduced as many disadvantages and evils, which are a formidable menace to the whole of human society.
Yes. Yes. All right. So again, it's Mother Church that defends the sacredness of the marriage, and in doing so actually protects the woman. Protects her. Because where divorce is allowed, the women can be just dropped and left in the street with her children and abandoned, which happens by these useless men. So Mother Church, by defending the marriage bond, protects the children, protects the wife, right? But it's an evil when the state and the laws of a certain government make divorce not only easy, but appealing. Tax breaks for unwed mothers. They get tax breaks. And all these grants by the government, that's wrong. Those are wrong. So, 90. Go ahead, Guadalupe.
To revert again to the expression of our predecessor, it is hardly necessary to point out what an amount of good is involved in the absolute indissolubility of wedlock, and what a train of evils follows upon divorce. Whenever the marriage bond remains intact, then we find marriages contracted with a sense of safety and security, while when separations are considered and the dangers of divorce are present, the marriage contract itself becomes insecure, or at least gives ground for anxiety and surprises. On the one hand, we see a wonderful strengthening of goodwill and cooperation in the daily life of husband and wife, while, on the other, both of these are miserably weakened by the presence of a facility for divorce. Here we have, at a very opportune moment, a source of help by which both parties are enabled to preserve their purity and loyalty. There we find harmful inducements to unfaithfulness. On this side we find the birth of children and their tuition and upbringing effectively promoted. Many avenues of discord closed amongst families and relations, and the beginnings of rivalry and jealousy easily suppressed. On that, very great obstacles to the birth and rearing of children and their education, and many occasions of quarrels and seeds of jealousy sown everywhere. Finally, but especially, the dignity and position of women in civil and domestic society is reinstated by the former, while by the latter it is shamefully lowered, and the danger is incurred, quote, of their being considered outcasts, slaves of the lusts of men, end quote.
Yes, he's quoting Pope Leo XIII. 91, Michael.
To conclude with the important words of Leo XIII, since the destruction of family life, quote, and the loss of national wealth is brought about more by the corruption of morals than by anything else, it is easily seen that divorce, which is born of the perverted morals of a people, and leads, as experiment shows, to vicious habits in public and private life, is particularly opposed to the well-being of the family and of the state. The serious nature of these evils will be the more clearly recognized when we remember that, once divorce has been allowed, there will be no sufficient means of keeping it in check within any definite bounds. Great is the force of example, greater still that of lust, and with such incitements it cannot but happen that divorce and its consequent setting loose of the passions that spread daily and attack the souls of many, like a contagious disease or a river bursting its banks and flooding the land.
Yes. 92.
Thus, as we read in the same letter, unless things change, the human family and the state have every reason to fear, lest they should suffer absolute ruin. All this was written 50 years ago, yet it is confirmed by the daily increasing of corruption of morals and the unheard of degradation of the family in those lands where communism reigns unchecked.
Now communism reigns in the USA. One of the big goals of communism is to destroy the family. More than half the marriages in the United States and Canada end up in divorce. More than half now. And this is being written in 1930s. And the Pope is saying, look how degraded the family is. And they push it. The synagogue of Satan promotes it in the movies, the music, and the words of the lyrics of many of these modern songs promote divorce. I'm going to do it my way. What's his name? Even in the 50s, Frank Sinatra. I want it my way. And other songs praising divorce. Please release me. I don't love you anymore. so let me go find another woman. Really ugly, horrible. And I would say better to have, it's not good, but better to have fighting parents who fight every day and argue, but stay together, than to have a divorce. It's better to have, okay parents, maybe they're not perfect, but better to have okay parents and maybe even slightly bad parents than to have divorced parents. The divorce does far greater damage, far greater harm to the children and society as well. So the Pope is saying all this, divorce is a disaster. It's not justified. And no modern government can legalize it without offending God. And now, look, everywhere you drive in most American cities, you have, most of the billboards now are lawyers raking for money. Divorce, 1-800-DIVORCE, call this lawyer. And then, of course, car injuries and compensation. But most of it's now all just the lawyers who are like parasites, living off the corruption of the people. And the divorce courts are horrible, absolutely horrible, from what I hear. They always favor the unfaithful spouse. They usually favor the women too, and leave the men in the lurch. So it's really ugly. It's horribly ugly, this whole divorce scene and child care protective agencies. They're horrible. They're communist. 93.
Thus far, venerable brethren, we have admired with due reverence what the all-wise creator and redeemer of the human race has ordained with regard to human marriage. At the same time, we have expressed our grief that such a pious ordinance of the divine goodness should today and on every side be frustrated and trampled upon by the passions, errors, and vices of men.
Yes. 94. Guadalupe.
It is then fitting that, with all fatherly solicitude, we should turn our mind to seek out suitable remedies whereby those most detestable abuses, which we have mentioned, may be removed, and everywhere marriage may again be revealed. Okay, so the popes, as they usually do in their encyclicals, they will point out the errors, and then they will give remedies. Go on. To this end, it behooves us, above all else, to call to mind that firmly established principle, esteemed alike in sound philosophy and sacred theology, namely, that whatever things have deviated from their right order cannot be brought back to that original state which is in harmony with their nature, except by a return to the divine plan, which, as the angelic doctor teaches, is the exemplar of all right order.
Yeah, so God's plan is what the laws of every country, the political order should be conformed to, which always comes back down to the kingship of Christ, doesn't it? 95, Michael.
Wherefore, our predecessor of happy memory, Leo XIII, attacked the doctrine of the naturalists in these words, quote, "It is a divinely appointed law that whatsoever things are constituted by God, the author of nature, these we find the more useful and salutary, the more they remain in their natural state, unimpaired and unchanged, inasmuch as God, the creator of all things, intimately knows what is suited to the constitution and the preservation of each, and by his will and mind has so ordained all this, that each may duly achieve its purpose. But if the boldness and wickedness of men change and disturb this order of things, so providentially disposed, then, indeed, things so wonderfully ordained will begin to be injurious, and will cease to be beneficial, either because in the change they have lost their power to benefit, or because God himself is thus pleased to draw down chastisement on the pride and presumption of men." Unquote.
In order, therefore, to restore due order in this matter of marriage, It is necessary that all should bear in mind what is the divine plan and strive to conform to it. So he's saying only the divine plan and will of God can fix this. So what is it? What is the will of God pertaining to marriage? And he's just going to repeat again what the church has always taught. 97.
Wherefore, since the chief obstacle to this study is the power
We missed 96.
I read it.
Father read it.
of unbridled lust, which indeed is the most potent cause of sinning against the sacred laws of matrimony. And since man cannot hold in check his passions unless he first subject himself to God, this must be his primary endeavor, in accordance with the plan divinely ordained. For it is a sacred ordinance that whosoever shall have first subjected himself to God will, by the aid of divine grace, be glad to subject himself to his own passions and concupiscence. While he who is a rebel against God will, to his sorrow, experience within himself the violent rebellion of his worst passions.
Yes, so when men submits to God, it's easier to control the passions. And God allows that sometimes as a punishment. When they refuse a submission to God, break his commandments, they become slaves to the worst passions of violence, cruelty, lust, of course. 98.
And how wisely this has been decreed, St. Augustine thus shows. This indeed is fitting, that the lower be subject to the higher, so that he who would have subject himself whatever is below him, should himself submit to whatever is above him. Acknowledge order, seek peace, be thou subject to God, and thy flesh subject to thee. What more fitting, what more fair? Thou art subject to the higher, and the lower is subject to thee. Do thou serve him who made thee, so that that which was made for thee may serve thee. For we do not commend this order, namely the flesh to thee, and thou to God, but thou to God, and the flesh to thee. If, however, thou despisest the subjection of thyself to God, thou shalt never bring about the subjection of the flesh to thyself. If thou dost not obey the Lord, thou shalt be tormented by thy servant. This right order on the part of God's wisdom is mentioned by the Holy Doctor of the Gentiles, inspired by the Holy Ghost. First, speaking of those ancient philosophers who refused to adore and reverence him whom they knew to be the creator of the universe, he says, wherefore God gave them up to the desires of their heart unto uncleanness, to dishonor their own bodies among themselves. And again, for this same God delivered them up to shameful affections. And St. James says, God resisteth the proud and giveth grace to the humble, without which grace, as the same Doctor of the Gentiles reminds us, man cannot subdue the rebellion of his flesh.
So you see how important the Sacred Heart of Jesus really is. The Sacred Heart of our Lord invites all men to be submitted to him, his sweet yoke, but by obeying God, and submitting to his commandments and his laws, the moral laws, it frees men. And when men are submitted to God, those under them are more easily submissive to them. And this is what Leo XIII says about Catholic political authorities. If they obey God, men will obey them easy. If they don't obey God and care less about his laws, they're going to have rebellion and insurrections against them. And it's pretty much the modern world. It's all at each other's throat because of the denial of submission to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So priests must preach the Sacred Heart. Priests must preach the reign of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. That's the only solution. There is no other peace or possibility. No treaty, Trump can talk all he wants about peace and the mighty USA and we're going to get respected again. But without the Sacred Heart, it's a joke. And all it means is more might, more explosives, more bombs, more drones that can go in and shoot people. That's all it means. Without the reign of the Sacred Heart, it's just all hot air. So who else is going to preach to the world the reign of the Sacred Heart of Jesus? Who else? But his dogs. And that's his priests. That was the great mission of Father Matteo. Father Matteo, the one who promoted the enthronement to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, right? Of the family. That was his great work, enthroning the Sacred Heart. He went all over the world with this great devotion. So priests need to do this. The reign of the Sacred Heart in the family, at least. If not in the political level. But that has to be the goal, the political level. Next, where are we? To paragraph 99. Go ahead, Gabriel, or Guadalupe.
Consequently, as the onslaughts of these uncontrolled passions cannot in any way be lessened, unless the spirit first shows a humble compliance of duty and reverence towards its maker, it is before all, needful that those who are joined in the bond of sacred wedlock should be wholly imbued with a profound and genuine sense of duty towards God, which will shape their whole lives and fill their minds and wills with a very deep reverence for the majesty of God.
Yes, which is in the heart. So that means husbands and wives must be men of prayer. They must pray. Otherwise they won't have this humility and submission to God. Right? Blessed Mary of Agreda, her parents were very devout. She remembers her father during Lent. He would wear a crown of thorns, put a cross on his back, and pray the Stations of the Cross before going to work. That way. So that's quite a powerful scene. But it shows often you read that in the lives of the saints, born of pious parents, born of devout parents, who loved God and were submitted to him and obeyed him and loved his commandments and taught that in the home. 100, where are we? 100 or 101?
100.
Go on, Michael.
Quite fittingly, therefore, and quite in accordance with the defined norm of Christian sentiment, do those pastors of souls act who, to prevent married people from failing in the observance of God's law, urge them to perform their duty and exercise their religion so that they should give themselves to God continually, ask for his divine assistance, frequent the sacraments, and always nourish and preserve a loyal and thoroughly sincere devotion to God.
101.
They are greatly deceived, who having underestimated or neglected these means which rise above nature, think that they can induce men by the use and discovery of the natural sciences, such as those of biology, the science of heredity, and the like, to curb their carnal desires. We do not say this in order to belittle those natural means which are not dishonest, for God is the author of nature as well as of grace, and he has disposed the good things of both orders for the beneficial use of men. The faithful therefore can and ought to be assisted also by natural means. But they are mistaken who think that these means are able to establish chastity in the nuptial union, or that they are more effective than supernatural grace.
102, Gabriel.
This conformity of wedlock and moral conduct with the divine laws respective of marriage, without which its effective restoration cannot be brought about, supposes, however, that all can discern readily, with real certainty, and without any accompanying error, that those laws are, but everyone can see to how many fallacies an avenue would be opened up and how many errors would become mixed with the truth if it were left solely to the light of reason of each to find it out, or if it were to be discovered by the private interpretation of the truth which is revealed. And if this is applicable to many other truths of the moral orator, we must all the more pay attention to those things which appertain to marriage, where the inordinate desire for pleasure can attack frail human nature and easily deceive it and lead it astray. This is all the more true of the observance of the divine law, which demands sometimes hard and repeated sacrifices, for which, as experience points out, a weak man can find so many excuses for avoiding the fulfillment of the divine law.
Yeah, so men are very prone towards evil, prone towards pleasure, prone towards making any excuse to weasel out of obeying God, especially in marriage. So this is why the couple needs to be people of prayer, with family rosary in the home and devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. 103, Guadalupe.
On this account, in order that no falsification or corruption of the divine law, but a true genuine knowledge of it may enlighten the minds of men and guide their conduct, it is necessary that a filial and humble obedience towards the Church should be combined with devotedness to God and the desire of submitting to Him. For Christ Himself made the Church the teacher of truth, and those things also which concern the right regulation of moral conduct, even though some knowledge of the same is not beyond human reason. For just as God, in the case of the natural truths of religion and morals, added revelation to the light of reason, so that what is right and true, quote, in the present state also of the human race, may be known readily with real certainty, without any admixture of error, end quote. So for the same purpose he has constituted the Church the guardian and the teacher of the whole of the truth concerning religion and moral conduct. To her, therefore, should the faithful show obedience and subject their minds and hearts, so as to be kept unharmed and free from error and moral corruption, and so that they shall not deprive themselves of that assistance given by God with such liberal bounty. They ought to show this due obedience not only when the Church defines something with solemn judgment, but also in proper proportion, when by the constitutions and decrees of the Holy See, opinions are prescribed and condemned as dangerous and distorted.
Yes. Okay, well, 104, Michael?
Wherefore, let the faithful also be on their guard against the overrated independence of private judgment, and that false autonomy of human reason. For it is quite foreign to everyone, bearing the name of a Christian, to trust his own mental powers with such pride, as to agree only with those things which he can examine from their inner nature, and to imagine that the Church, sent by God to teach and guide all nations, is not conversant with present affairs and circumstances, or even that they must obey only in those matters which she has decreed by solemn definition, as though her other decisions might be presumed to be false, or putting forward insufficient motive for truth and honesty. Quite to the contrary, a characteristic of all true followers of Christ, lettered and unlettered, is to suffer themselves to be guided and led in all things that touch upon faith or morals by the Holy Church of God through its supreme pastor, the Roman Pontiff, who is himself guided by Jesus Christ our Lord.
Yes, so you have a family. They have their 5th child, and the father is struggling to put bread on the table. The temptation of the world is, look, the neighbors only have 3, the other neighbors, our cousins, only have 2. Maybe we should start using NFP. Maybe we should start using some contraception here, birth control. After all, everybody's doing it. After all, Father so-and-so said it was okay. But the Pope here is saying, no, in those temptations, they have to go by what the Church teaches, and God will bless them. Just continue taking the children God sends, and they will see miracles. And, the husband will get a better job, a higher raise, whatever. They'll get an inheritance. Something will help them. God will never leave his friends abandoned. He'll put them to the test. He might allow them to be tempted to these thoughts. And certainly in the modern world, all young couples certainly go through that temptation. But the happiest of them all are those who submit to the constant teaching of the church, the spirit of what our Lord says. Pick up your cross and follow me. This is what the SSPX priests always used to preach. But then in St. Mary's, when was it? It was early on, in 2013 or 14, Father McFarland gave all the sermons at St. Mary's on one Sunday, saying basically, you want to make sure you can afford a good education for your children, that they can go to school and college. So it's not a race to have children. So he didn't say explicitly use natural means, but it was implicit, very implicit, so much so that some of the parishioners were quite angry because they never heard this before from SSPX pulpits. But it was promoted from higher up. So this it goes right with the spirit of compromise of Bishop Follet. It goes right with it. No more the spirit of sacrifice in opposition to the spirit of the world and revolution. But, just go along to get along. But don't commit a mortal sin. But do as little as you can without sacrifice. Go as low as you can without breaking the rules. So what the young people need to hear is, no, you got married, you carry the cross of marriage. And that cross is, you're going to have children, and they're going to be hard to raise. And you take the children God sends, but he will bless you. He will not abandon you. Don't you say that in the Our Father. Our Father will give us this day our daily bread. He's going to supply for you. Bishop Tissier said years ago that everywhere he went, whenever God blessed them with another child, most of these fathers told him, I got a raise in my pay, or I got a new job. I was able to handle this. I didn't know how I was going to pay it, but this job came up, and now I can see St. Joseph working. And we see that everywhere we go, right? Up in Quebec, there's some famous families that have 21, 22 children. I think the Goyettes have 23, I think. So it's quite a dynasty. So this is what Pope Pius IX is saying. So the world pulls, take it easy, follow the spirit of the world, use natural means to limit children, but that's not permitted by the church. Only in extreme cases is what's called NFP, natural family planning, ever permitted. Only in extreme cases. Like the mother almost died having the last baby. So she can have time to recuperate. That's all. That's all that the church says. But a lot of people find loopholes for this. 105, how far are we?
15 more seconds, Father.
Okay, let's just stop here, and we'll pick up next time. Agitorium nostrum in nomine Domini.
Qui feci